In the lush heartlands where the sun painted the hills gold and rivers whispered secrets to the stones, there lay the ancient kingdom of Elthamera. Cradled between enchanted woods and sapphire seas, Elthamera was a realm where beauty and mystery danced hand in hand. The skies above it sparkled just a little brighter than anywhere else, and the land itself seemed to hum with a quiet, ancient magic, an old, noble kind, steeped in stories passed down through the tongues of elders and embroidered into tapestries that lined the castle halls. For centuries, Elthamera had been ruled not just by bloodlines but by worthiness. Magic lived in its traditions, and nowhere was this more evident than in the legend of the dress of Eloria, a living garment crafted by the first high enchantress of the realm, Lady Eloria, over 1,000 years ago. It was said that she spun the threads herself beneath the moonlight, weaving not only silk and silver but her wisdom, loyalty, and the hopes of a peaceful kingdom. The dress shimmered like water in candlelight and carried within it an enchantment that no spellbook could replicate. It could sense the heart of its wearer. The dress of Eloria would rest dormant, folded within a crystal chest in the royal vaults, until it was summoned for a queen deemed worthy. No force could coerce it. No sorcery could awaken it early. And only the one who bore the spirit of true queenship, compassion, courage, humility, could wear it. Many knew the stories of impostors through the ages who tried to claim the throne with the dress. None succeeded. The gown would turn stiff, unwearable, or vanish entirely until it could return to one it chose. At the center of this realm's latest chapter was Princess Amara, the sole heir to the throne. She had been born on a day when wild roses bloomed out of season, and her first cry was said to make the palace bells chime without being touched. As she grew, so too did the love the people held for her. Amara was gentle in voice but fierce in loyalty, always seen in the gardens tending to sick flowers or reading to the stable hands by lantern light. Her eyes held a soft sort of wisdom, and her kindness was not a performance, it was simply how she was made. But not all hearts in the palace shared that same light. There was Valina, Amara's stepsister, born of the king's second wife. Where Amara's aura calmed the room, Valina stirred it like wind through dry leaves. Beautiful and sharp-tongued, Valina was the daughter of a noblewoman with grand ambitions and little patience for humility. From the moment the two girls were brought together under the palace roof, there was an unspoken rivalry, one Amara never acknowledged and one Valina nurtured like a thorny vine. Valina resented Amara's effortless warmth, her place in the people's hearts, and most of all, the unshakable prophecy that the dress of Eloria would choose her. Despite being raised together, their differences deepened with time. Valina studied charm and court manners with calculated grace. Amara learned the names of every servant and the meanings of the old songs. The court saw one as destined, the other as a shadow clawing for light. Tragedy struck when both girls were still in their tender years. A fever swept through the castle, claiming both the king and queen within days of each other. Their passing left Elthamera suspended in grief, and leadership passed to the Council of Elders, a circle of wise advisors who would govern until Amara's 18th year. That was the age when, according to royal custom, the princess would wear the dress of Eloria before the entire kingdom in a sacred ceremony, her coronation and spiritual recognition as queen. Until then, the two girls grew side by side, yet worlds apart. Amara continued to embody the grace her parents instilled in her, while Valina honed ambition in silence, watching and waiting. To the people there was no question, Amara was their hope. But within the castle walls, Valina's envy deepened, fed by whispers from her mother's old allies and her own growing belief that if the dress were hers, the kingdom would follow. After all, magic was fickle, wasn't it? And surely power could be bent to one's will, if one only knew how. And so the stage was set, an enchanted land ruled by legacy, a living dress that guarded the throne, a princess raised by love, and a stepsister kindled by envy. Destiny, ever watching, held its breath. The morning sun poured through the stained glass windows of the palace chapel, casting kaleidoscopic light across the marble floor. All of Elthamera stirred with excitement, for Princess Amara's 18th birthday was only days away. It would not be just a celebration of life but of destiny, the birthday of becoming, as it was called in ancient tradition. It was the day the chosen royal would don the dress of Eloria, in the presence of the council, the court, and the people, and by wearing it, be acknowledged by magic itself as the rightful ruler of the kingdom. The castle buzzed with activity. Velvet banners were hung across balconies and gardens, bearing the sigil of the moon-kissed rose. Bakers worked tirelessly to prepare sugared delicacies shaped like crowns and nightingales. In the great hall, musicians rehearsed the hymn of the chosen, their flutes and lyres echoing in regal harmony. Outside the palace gates, villagers arrived early, setting up tents and stalls, hoping to catch even the faintest glimpse of the ceremony. But at the heart of it all was Amara, poised, calm and quietly overwhelmed. She wandered through the gardens with her lady-in-waiting, Lyra, practicing her speech in soft murmurs. Though she never sought the throne for power, she had always felt its call as a duty. The dress, she had been told since childhood, would only accept her when the time was right. And now, the moment was nearly upon her. Yet beneath her grace lingered worry. Not fear of the dress rejecting her. That possibility had never crossed her mind, but something else. Something unspoken that gnawed at the corners of her thoughts. In recent weeks she had noticed Valina watching her more often, her gaze lingering too long, her smile too stiff. Valina had been cold but civil during the preparations, offering polite words and attending council events as expected. She never missed an opportunity to mention how fickle magic can be or how tradition often blinds us to newer possibilities. To others they were throwaway remarks. But to Amara they sounded like the beginnings of something darker. Valina had not always been this way, not entirely. There had been fleeting moments in their shared childhood when she'd shown warmth, even laughter. But as they grew, as the prophecy loomed closer, Valina's laughter dried up, replaced with a quiet bitterness that clung to her like shadow. And now, with the ceremony so near, that shadow had taken root deep in her heart. Behind locked doors, Valina spoke in hushed tones to her closest servant and confidant, Marin. Marin, a clever girl with sharp eyes and a loyalty born not of love but of ambition, had served Valina since girlhood. She had seen the way the court fawned over Amara, the way the council dismissed Valina as merely a noble daughter, not an heir. "They've already crowned her in their hearts," Valina whispered one evening, pacing her room while Marin polished a silver hair comb. "They don't even question it. The dress will choose her, they say. But what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't get the chance?" Marin paused. "You mean to stop the ceremony?" "I mean to wear the dress before she does," Valina replied, her eyes alight. "If I appear before the council first, dressed as queen, with the dress around me, what choice will they have? The people will see me. They will believe. But the dress," Marin hesitated. "It is said to reject the unworthy." "I am not unworthy," Valina hissed, her voice brittle with rage. "I am determined. That should count for something. Magic is old and old things can be tricked." Marin said nothing more, but later that night she made her way down to the Hall of Relics, where the crystal chest that held the dress of Eloria was guarded by a single ancient spell and 2 sentries who, like many in the palace, saw only what they expected to see. Marin was clever and quiet. She watched. She listened. And most importantly, she waited. The eve before the ceremony came quickly, cloaked in the warmth of summer twilight. Amara retired early, her mind full of speeches and memories. She stood at her balcony, looking out at the glowing lanterns below and the stars that peered shyly through the clouds. A strange wind stirred her hair, and with it, that same sense of unease returned. Meanwhile, under the shroud of midnight, Valina moved like a shadow through the palace's eastern wing. Draped in a deep cloak, she met Marin by the old stairwell that led to the vault. Marin had already unraveled the locking charm, having slipped a false key to the palace enchanter days before, and bribed one of the guards with a potion that sent him into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. They entered the Hall of Relics, their footsteps echoing against ancient stone. There, at the far end of the chamber, stood the crystal chest, tall as a man rimmed in silver filigree. Inside it rested the dress of Eloria, folded as delicately as a sleeping spirit, glowing faintly with a light that pulsed in time with the heartbeat of the realm. Valina approached it slowly, her breath shallow. For a moment she hesitated, her hand trembling as it reached for the chest's latch. The air grew colder. The room seemed to breathe. But then, as though steeled by the very envy that had festered in her for years, she opened the chest. The dress did not resist. It lay still, quiet, almost indifferent. She reached in and pulled it free, expecting heat, rejection, perhaps even pain. But the cloth was soft beneath her fingers, heavier than she imagined. As she held it, it shimmered in the torchlight, deep silver with faint streaks of lavender and blue, like twilight caught in silk. Valina smiled. "Marin, it's mine." And in that moment, in the stillness of night, the dress, silent and watchful, left the crystal chest not because it had been chosen, but because it was curious. Because magic, even old magic, still had its own games to play. By morning the chest was empty. The dawn of the coronation day arrived not with joy, but with tension heavy in the air, like a coming storm masked by sunshine. Courtiers, nobles, and emissaries from neighboring realms filled the castle with colorful silks and bright laughter, oblivious to the truth that was already beginning to unravel in the heart of the palace. Valina stood in front of a tall silver mirror in her private chambers, her breath shallow, her chest tight with anticipation and dread. The dress of Eloria clung to her body like ivy wrapped around stone, unmoving, unnatural. It had taken nearly an hour to force it on. The moment the fabric touched her skin, it had grown cold as snowmelt, and where it should have settled gracefully over her shoulders, it clung awkwardly, folding in strange, stiff shapes. Her maidservants whispered nervously but dared not question her. Valina's lips were drawn into a tight smile, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the collar again and again, trying to smooth its sharp edges. But the dress refused to yield. Still, she told herself, I have it on. That's all that matters. Appearances were everything. The people would see the dress. They would believe the prophecy fulfilled. They would accept her. When the council bell tolled mid-morning, Valina made her entrance in the great hall. Rows of noblemen and noblewomen bowed as she entered, their expressions ranging from polite surprise to concealed confusion. No announcement had been made of her wearing the dress. No official summons had gone out for the coronation to begin. But here she was, emerging down the royal aisle, adorned in the sacred garment that should have graced only the one the magic chose. The council members, seated at their crescent-shaped table at the far end of the hall, rose in uncertainty. High Chancellor Idrin, the eldest and wisest of the council, stepped forward. Lady Valina, he said, voice slow, careful, you honor us with your presence, but may I ask what this means? Valina kept her head high, though each step forward felt like dragging boulders behind her. The train of the dress, once known to float like air, twisted like a living rope. She nearly stumbled halfway to the dais, catching herself with a gasp as the fabric bunched beneath her heel. The crowd winced. Whispers began. I come to fulfill my duty, Valina said, breathless. To claim my right as ruler. The dress has accepted me. She raised her arms slightly to show the shimmering gown, but at that moment the color shifted. The silver silk darkened before their eyes, reddening like embers being stirred. Valina faltered, trying to shake the cloth into place, but it only grew heavier, sagging at the shoulders, crumpling at the waist, the once ethereal train now dragging like a sodden cloak. Gasps rippled through the hall. Idrin's brow furrowed. Are you, well, my lady? It's nothing, Valina snapped, her voice too sharp. Nerves. The moment is simply overwhelming. She tried to continue her approach to the throne dais, but each step seemed a battle. Her ankles twisted, the hem caught on nothing, the bodice pinched so tightly it stole her breath. The dress clung in all the wrong places, forming awkward lumps, stiffening as if rejecting her very shape. Sweat beaded along her hairline, but she dared not show weakness. With trembling hands she placed the ceremonial tiara, never the true crown, on her head and turned to face the council. I am ready to serve. But the silence that followed was not reverence. It was confusion. Unease. The council murmured among themselves. A few exchanged glances that carried the weight of disbelief. High Chancellor Idrin stepped forward once more. And Princess Amara? He asked delicately. Is she aware of this? Valina smiled tightly. She has chosen a life of spiritual retreat. She found herself unready to lead. Some nodded, others frowned. But no one challenged her outright. Not yet. The ceremony, such as it was, ended without a single cheer. The people, watching through open gallery doors and from the courtyard beyond, dispersed in quiet puzzlement. Valina left the hall with a cold victory nestled uneasily in her chest. She had done it. She had worn the dress. She had stood before the council. But something was wrong, very wrong, and she felt it down to her bones. Back in her chambers, the dress turned volatile. It began with the fastening strings. They slipped free one by one no matter how tightly she tied them. The bodice sagged, then constricted, then loosened again. When she tried to remove it, the silk gripped her arms, resisting. She yanked it free with a cry, and where it had touched her skin, angry red marks bloomed like burns. She recoiled, breathing hard. Marin rushed to her side trying to help, but even she backed away when the dress began to shift colors again, reddening, then pulsing with violet hues, then flashing a cold, unsettling black. It fell from Valina's shoulders and slumped to the floor as if exhausted or disgusted. Valina stared down at it in horror. What is it doing? She whispered. Marin shook her head, eyes wide. It's alive, my lady. Just as the old story said. But I wore it, Valina hissed. I had it on. It didn't stop me. No, Marin said slowly, but it didn't accept you either. Velina turned away, fury rising in her throat like bile. It will obey. It has no choice. I am queen now. The dress will learn. But the dress lay silent on the floor, its shimmer dimmed, its folds like folded wings turned away from her. And as night crept back into the castle, so too did the whispers. That the ceremony had felt wrong. That the dress had fought back. That something had shifted in the magic of Elthamera. Something sacred had been broken. And far away in the convent woods, beyond the castle's reach, the true heartbeat of the kingdom stirred once more. Ask ChatGPT. The morning after the stolen ceremony broke like any other, with birdsong in the trees and sunlight dripping through palace windows, but to Amara, it felt like a world turned upside down. She had risen early as she always did, expecting a flurry of attendants to arrive with preparations for the ceremony. Instead, the halls were silent. When Lyra arrived, eyes wide, breath short, it was not with flowers or robes but news. The dress, she said, her voice trembling, it's gone. And Velina wore it. Before the council. Last night. Amara felt her heart drop, not from surprise, some part of her had expected betrayal, but from the quiet, devastating confirmation of it. When she entered the council chamber demanding an audience, she was met not with warmth or explanation, but confusion, veiled suspicion and cautious eyes. High Chancellor Idrin, his robes heavy with responsibility, greeted her with a furrowed brow. Princess Amara, he said gently, why did you not inform us of your change of heart? Amara blinked. Change of heart. That you would not be accepting the dress. That you had withdrawn from your duty. What? Her voice cracked. I never said any such thing. I was preparing, waiting for the day I was called to wear it. It was then that Velina stepped forward, flanked by her ever-loyal Marin, her face painted with pained dignity. I told them you were having doubts, Velina said, voice soft and trembling. That you felt the burden was too great. That you needed time. I was only trying to help. Amara stared at her, thunderstruck. You lied, she said, but her voice was too quiet, too stunned. I did what I had to do, Velina replied, eyes gleaming. The kingdom cannot wait for indecision. You hesitated. The dress knew. A heavy silence fell. Some council members glanced between them, uncertain. Others looked away entirely. No one challenged Velina directly, not after seeing her in the dress, not when the truth felt murky and magic had seemingly made its choice. And so, cloaked in confusion and betrayal, Amara was sent away, not with chains or cruelty, but with that most dangerous punishment, doubt. She needs time for reflection, the Chancellor said. For clarity and peace. Let her go to the convent of Still Waters. Let her seek the truth of her heart there. It was exile in all but name. And so, on the day she should have been crowned, Amara left the palace grounds in a plain cloak, no guards, no fanfare. Only Lyra rode with her, silent and sorrowful. They rode for days, away from the marble towers and perfumed gardens of Elthamera, toward the mist-wrapped edges of the realm where common folk lived without magic or prophecy. Stillwaters was no palace. It was a modest haven nestled in a wooded valley, its stone chapel softened by ivy and thyme. The women there welcomed Amara with kindness but no reverence. They did not bow or curtsy. They offered her no titles. Here she was not Your Grace, but simply Amara. At first she grieved in silence. She wandered the gardens, eyes hollow, words few. She felt adrift, cut loose from everything she had known, everything she had been raised to become. But the quiet was healing and slowly the pain began to loosen its grip. The nuns taught her to till soil, to mend torn garments, to grind herbs for salves and teas. She learned how to wash linens with river stones, how to tend to the sick without spells, how to listen with her whole heart. She began to visit nearby villages, bringing simple remedies and gentle wisdom. People soon learned of the soft-spoken girl with patient hands and knowing eyes who never asked for thanks, only offered help. They did not know she was a princess. She never told them. But they called her Lady of the Valley, and they left flowers on her doorstep in the mornings. Amara smiled more. Not the practiced smile of court, but a quiet, genuine one. She found peace not in crowns or prophecy, but in laughter around kitchen fires, in the eyes of children she helped nurse back to health. Her royal bearing remained, not in the tilt of her chin, but in the grace of her presence, in the way people trusted her instinctively, drawn to her as bees to sunlight. One evening, after helping a boy with a broken leg, the village elder said to her, "You carry something old in you, girl. Not just kindness, legacy." She only smiled and shook her head. "I carry nothing but what the world has taught me." But in the dark of her room, when the valley was hushed and the stars blinked overhead, Amara sometimes reached into her satchel and pulled out a small piece of silk, pale silver, torn from the hem of a dress she had once touched as a child. A remnant she had kept since the day of her first royal lesson. She held it gently like memory itself. The kingdom believed she was gone. But Amara had not disappeared. She was simply becoming. In the weeks that followed Amara's exile, Valina tightened her grip on the throne with a hunger that barely masked her insecurity. Though she wore the dress of Eloria each time she entered the great hall or presided over a gathering, it was no longer the silent, dormant cloth she had first pulled from the crystal chest. The dress had begun to change, and not in any way Valina could control. At first it was subtle. On her second day seated before the council, her voice faltered mid-sentence as though swallowed by an unseen force. Her lips moved, but the words fell flat, as if the air around her refused to carry them. The council glanced at one another, puzzled. Valina cleared her throat and continued, blaming it on a chill in the air, but a seed of unease had been planted. Then, during a feast with foreign dignitaries, the dress's long silken train tangled itself around the feet of a visiting baron. He stumbled, wine sloshing down the front of his tunic, while Valina looked on in mortification. She tried to apologize, but the cloth twisted again, snapping one of her golden hairpins from its place. It landed with a sharp clink on her plate in full view of everyone. Marin tried to downplay the moment as bad luck, but Valina knew better. The fabric pulsed against her skin, hot then cold, tightening unexpectedly at her waist, pulling slightly at her collarbone as if in protest. She took to wearing stiff corsets beneath it to keep it in place, but the magic laughed at her efforts. The people began to whisper. Servants in the palace passed murmurs from kitchen to corridor. They spoke of how the dress seemed to move of its own accord. How, in the early morning light, it shimmered not with silver and grace but with a deep crimson that looked more like warning than regality. Rumors filtered through the capital like smoke, smoke that hinted at fire. In the markets, bakers and weavers spoke in hushed tones about how Queen Valina's dress refused to lie flat when she sat in council. How it sometimes glowed faintly during her speeches. And how more than once she had fled meetings early with clenched jaws and shaking hands. Some swore they had seen things in the folds of the dress. Faces, flickers of light, even shadows that didn't belong to anyone in the room. The illusion that Valina had been chosen began to crack. One afternoon, during a procession through the city square, the dress committed its boldest defiance yet. As Valina stood atop her carriage, waving to the people, the fabric at her sleeves began to shift. It lengthened and flared without her command. Then it darkened, slowly bleeding from pale silver to deep violet to pitch black. Gasps echoed across the square. The crowd stood frozen. Valina tried to hold her posture, to pretend nothing was amiss, but the transformation continued. The hem of the dress curled upward in strange spirals, revealing flashes of gold script that flickered then vanished. Her voice caught in her throat as she turned to Marin, who stood rigid with fear beside the driver. That night, Valina screamed in her chambers. She tore at the dress, threw it across the floor, beat it with her fists. But it would not burn, nor tear, nor yield. It slid across the stone like a serpent, folding in on itself. In the firelight, it shimmered red again, angry, hungry, wild. Marin urged her to stop wearing it altogether, to cast it aside, lock it away. I can't, Valina hissed, pacing. Without the dress I am nothing. Without it they'll see. They already see, Marin whispered. They're afraid. The next morning, Valina summoned the high priestess Elenwen, an ancient figure of grace and reverence who had served through 3 generations of monarchs. She arrived draped in white, her silver hair coiled like a crown, her eyes deep with knowing. Valina sat on the throne, the dress dull and motionless for once, lying heavy in her lap. I need your wisdom, she said through clenched teeth. The dress, it has changed. It resists me. It embarrasses me before the court. What is happening? Elenwen did not bow. She approached slowly, looking not at Valina but at the dress itself. Her fingers moved through the air like she was tracing symbols no one else could see. After a long silence, she spoke. The dress of Eloria was never just a garment. It was a covenant. It was born of the first queen's spirit, made with magic that listens, that remembers, that judges. Valina's face tightened. It chose me. No, Elenwen said softly, you forced it. It allowed itself to be worn, but it did not accept you. That is why it rebels. It knows you are not the one it waits for. Valina's voice rose, sharp and cutting. That is treason. It is truth, Elenwen replied. And truth is older than thrones. Valina waved her away, but her hands trembled. As the high priestess left, she spoke one last warning. If you continue to wear what was not meant for you, it will not be you who is changed. It will be the kingdom. And the kingdom was already changing. The nobles grew restless. Trade envoys hesitated to seal their contracts. Crops in the fields grew erratically. The air itself felt charged with a quiet discontent, as though Elthamra itself held its breath, waiting for the rightful spirit to return. In her growing paranoia, Valina ordered the dress locked away for several days. But without it, her authority faltered. Her voice lost its weight. Her presence dimmed. The court whispered that without the dress, she was only a girl with a stolen title. And so, fearing irrelevance more than rebellion, Valina put the dress back on. Despite its heat, its weight, its anger. The magic stirred again, stronger than before. And somewhere far from the palace, in the quiet of the valley, a girl who no longer called herself princess, looked up from the herb garden as a strange wind swept through the trees. She paused, hands still on the soil, as though she'd heard her name carried in the air. The kingdom's spirit had begun to remember. The valley of still waters had grown quiet in the late summer. Sunlight filtered through thick canopies, scattering golden patterns on the forest floor. The days were warm and still, the air sweet with ripe fruit and lavender. To most, it was a forgotten corner of the kingdom, far removed from courtly games and royal burdens. But within its humble cottages and winding paths, stories began to bloom. They started small, as whispers do. A woman in the village of Bristlebank claimed her son had been saved from fever by a young healer with a touch gentler than any midwife's. A traveling merchant from the east said he'd met a girl with silver-threaded hair who carried herself like she was born beneath stained glass. And in the fishing hamlet of Greentide, an old widow wept as she told of a stranger who helped bury her husband with words so kind, even the birds quieted to listen. She had the bearing of a queen, the widow said, but the hands of someone who had known work and pain. They called her Lady of the Valley, the Silent Queen, the Girl of Silver Grace. Some said she was a ghost of the old bloodline, others believed she was a blessing sent by the river gods. But to those who had once known her truly, the name they spoke was not a legend, it was a memory. Mara. In the capital, not all hearts had been lost to Valina's grip. Among the council were still a few who remembered the true princess, not as a figurehead, but as a child they had once taught, a voice they had trusted. Chief among them was Lord Brenrick, an old warrior turned advisor, and Lady Talia, the youngest of the council and one of the few who had dared question Valina's sudden rise. One evening, after Valina's fourth consecutive council session ended in disruption, the dress had blurred her outline for several seconds mid-speech, sending three nobles stumbling out in fear. Brenrick and Talia sat in private over maps and parchment, their expressions grim. "We cannot keep pretending this is right," Talia whispered. "The land is growing restless. The rivers flood out of season. The sky holds no stars some nights. Even the falcons refuse to nest in the palace towers." Brenrick tapped the table. "The dress mocks her. The kingdom weakens. I've heard rumors from the south, from a healer. A woman who walks like a queen, though she wears no crown." Talia looked up, eyes sharp. "Then we must go. Quietly. If there's even a chance." It took them days of careful travel and more days still to follow the right trail. They posed as simple travelers, following stories shared in whispers by shepherds, woodsmen, and mothers. And at last, in the village of Thornby, nestled between two brooks and hidden by elm trees, they found her. She stood in a small herb garden behind the convent, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands dusted with earth. Her hair was longer now, braided down her back. Her face was sun-kissed, her posture unassuming, but there was no mistaking her. She looked up as they approached, eyes widening first in recognition, then in alarm. "Lord Brenrick." "Lady Talia," she said carefully. "You shouldn't be here." "We came because we had to," Brenrick said. "Because the kingdom is unraveling." Amara wiped her hands and led them inside, offering tea without ceremony, as if they were old friends rather than nobles of the realm. They sat at her small wooden table where sunlight painted everything warm. "We know what happened was unjust," Talia said gently. "We didn't see it clearly then. But we do now." "I don't need apologies," Amara replied, though her voice softened. "I needed trust. And when it mattered most, no one gave it." Brenrick leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Valina wears the dress, but it torments her. The people fear her. The court is divided. The crops fail. The dress rebels not because she is weak, but because she is not you." Amara stood, walking slowly to the small window where vines curled over the sill. She was quiet for a long time. "I found peace here," she said at last. "For the first time in my life I wasn't seen as a crown. Just a person. I belong here." "You belong," Talia said gently, "where your spirit can heal the kingdom. Not just its people." Amara turned. Her eyes held a different light now, not innocence but earned strength. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I don't want a throne built on bitterness." "Then take it back with mercy," Brenrick replied. "Not for power. For balance." Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. The birds fell briefly silent. "I don't even know if the dress would still come to me," Amara whispered. "It's not about the dress anymore," Talia said. "It's about the land. And it's calling for its queen." Amara looked down at her hands, calloused, rough, strong. She thought of the villagers, of the children she'd sung to sleep, of the women she'd helped through pain and grief. And she thought of the palace, the halls filled with quiet magic now turning wild. She had been born into royalty, but now she understood what it meant to earn it. She nodded once. "I will return. Not as a girl stolen from. Not as a princess wronged. But as the queen the kingdom had always needed." Hope began to rise like the sun cresting over the valley. The sun rose bright and golden on the morning of the Moonflower Festival, a celebration older than the kingdom itself. Lanterns swayed between towers, musicians tuned their lutes and flutes, and Elthamra's capital bloomed with color. Nobles and villagers alike flooded the marble square before the palace gates, eager for distraction from the unease that had gripped the realm in recent moons. Valina stood at the balcony above the festival courtyard, wearing the dress of Eloria like a chain of command she dared not remove. Its silver fabric shimmered as always, but beneath the sunlight, it pulsed with a sickly flicker, sometimes silver, sometimes bruised purple, sometimes dull as lead. She had long stopped pretending it was loyal. Now she wore it like armor, hoping presence alone would suffice. "Smile, my queen," Marin whispered, adjusting Valina's cloak from behind. "The people must see strength." Valina clenched her jaw and stepped forward. A trumpet called. The crowd quieted. She raised her hand to speak. And somewhere below, beyond the guards and the heavy palace doors, Amara walked among the crowd, cloaked in humble linen, a scarf drawn lightly over her head. Lord Brenrick and Lady Talia flanked her at a respectful distance, keeping to the shadows. Word of her return had not been spoken. No proclamations. No banners. No grand march. Only steps, measured, steady, unshaken. The moment her boots touched the stone threshold of the palace courtyard, something shifted. The air tensed. The wind changed direction. A dove, previously perched atop the chapel cross, launched upward into a wide arc, scattering feathers in its wake. And high above, Valina faltered. Her breath caught. The dress, quiet just moments before, began to stir. She felt it first as a vibration, then a pull. The bodice tightened. The sleeves writhed. Her arms jerked slightly as if tugged by invisible hands. She turned sharply toward Marin. "What's happening?" But Marin only backed away in shock, her gaze fixed on the train of the dress, which had begun to lift, not in wind but on its own, as if rising to meet something, someone. The crowd gasped. Then without warning the dress moved. It tore itself from Valina's body in a flurry of silk and light. The seams unraveled with a sound like rushing water, threads sparkling and lifting into the air. The bodice yanked backward, pulling Valina off balance. She screamed, clawing at the fabric, but it slipped through her fingers like mist. She fell hard onto the stone floor of the balcony. Below, the crowd cried out in confusion, then awe, as the floating garment arced through the air like a bird of starlight. It drifted downward, twisting in impossible spirals, until it hovered just above a young woman in the crowd. Amara stood still, her eyes wide but calm, the scarf falling back from her face. And the dress, ancient, willful, watching, descended. It wrapped itself around her in a blink of silver fire. No hands touched it. No assistance was needed. The fabric swirled around her waist, slipped over her shoulders and fastened with a whisper. It shimmered brighter than it ever had on Valina, brighter than it had in generations. The silver deepened into moonlight, faint patterns of glowing script dancing across the hem. The crowd was silent. Then came a sound, a soft, deep chime, from the palace bells which no one had touched. And then another. And another. 12 bells, as if the kingdom itself had recognized her. High Chancellor Idrin, who had remained mostly silent during Valina's rule, stepped out onto the dais, his eyes wet with something like reverence. He dropped to one knee. Lady Talia followed. Then Brenrick. Then the guards at the gates. And then the people, thousands of them, fell to their knees in unison as if they had always known this day would come. Amara stood tall, the dress now a part of her. Her hair caught the breeze. Her posture straightened with a grace that was not pride, but certainty. The light around her pulsed gently, warming rather than blinding. Valina scrambled to her feet on the balcony, her face pale, fury and panic warping her features. "She stole it," she shouted, voice cracking. "She bewitched it, bewitched you all." But the people did not answer. The council did not move. Only the dress responded, by glowing with a shimmer so pure and soft it quieted even the angry rhythm in Valina's chest. "Seize her," Idrin said. 2 guards hesitated only a second before rushing up the steps to the balcony. Valina turned to run but was caught by the hem of her own discarded royal cloak, which tangled around her boots and brought her to her knees once more. As she was dragged away, screaming, Amara walked up the steps to the palace, each footfall echoed by silence. Not a silence of fear, but reverence. She paused at the top just as Valina was being escorted past her. Their eyes met. For a brief moment neither spoke. Then Amara said softly, "You wore power like a crown. But it is meant to be a promise." Valina turned her face away, silent. Inside the palace, the Hall of Queens waited, its marble floor reflecting the light that now clung to Amara's every movement. Portraits of rulers past lined the walls, their painted eyes watching. She entered slowly, reverently, and turned to face the council. "I did not come to take revenge," she said, voice clear and ringing. "I came because the kingdom needs healing. And healing does not come from fear. It comes from truth, from unity, from service." The council bowed. The people outside began to cheer, first one voice, then another, until the square rang with thunderous applause and cries of joy. Children tossed flower petals into the air. Drummers struck up a slow, rising rhythm. The bells rang again, unbidden. And in the great hall, the dress of Eloria shimmered softly against Amara's form, at peace at last. The queen had returned. Not because she fought for the crown, but because the crown had always been waiting for her. The throne room of Elthamera, once a place of echoing authority and distant power, now hummed with quiet breath and morning light. Gone were the dark banners and the somber silks Valina had once hung. In their place, garlands of mountain jasmine wound around pillars, and light poured through stained glass windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. The people had returned not just to celebrate, but to witness. They gathered in silence beneath the marble arches, their eyes not fixed on judgment, but on possibility. Valina stood at the center of the hall, her fine dress replaced by a simple gray tunic, her hair no longer sculpted in elegant curls. She looked smaller now, frayed, frightened, defiant still, but shaken by the clarity of her fall. Beside her stood 2 guards, though their hands rested lightly on their hilts. She was no longer a threat, only a reckoning. At the dais, Queen Amara sat upon the throne, not slouched in indifference nor stiff with ceremonial pretense. She sat with calm purpose, the dress of Eloria flowing around her like moonlight reborn. It moved with her breath, soft and silent, no longer wild but serene. It glowed faintly with approval, a mirror of the heart that wore it. "Valina of Elthamera," Amara began, her voice gentle but clear, "you betrayed the trust of this kingdom. You stole what was not yours, manipulated truth, and brought fear to our people." Valina met her gaze. "You would kill me in silk and call it justice," she said bitterly. But Amara only blinked slowly. "No. I will not rule with cruelty. That is the throne's oldest temptation. And I will not feed it." A quiet murmur spread through the hall. No swords were drawn. No chains rattled. Only stillness, like the pause between storm and bloom. "You were raised beside me. You lived in the same halls. Drank the same wine. Learned the same lessons. And yet, where I sought to understand our people, you sought to rise above them." Amara rose from the throne and descended the steps, the dress flowing behind her like a river at dusk. When she stood in front of Valina she looked not down, but across. "You wish to rule so badly," she said, "then learn what it truly means." Valina frowned, confused. "I sentence you," Amara continued, "to serve the people of Elthamera for 10 years. You will travel the villages, live among the laborers and healers, teach children, grow food, dig wells and care for the sick." Valina's mouth parted, stunned. "Manual labor? Service?" Amara corrected. "True queenship begins with it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some had expected exile. Others, execution. But this was something deeper. "You will be watched," Amara said. "Not as a prisoner but as a student. You will learn humility if not for yourself, Then for the sake of those who once believed in you. Velina looked away, but her shoulders sagged with something like understanding. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But the path to it had been offered. Amara turned back to the throne and raised one hand. The dress of Eloria shimmered once, then again, then lifted ever so slightly as if to speak. A pulse of soft light spread outward and hushed the hall. I speak now to the spirit of the dress, Amara said solemnly. For generations you have served this kingdom. You have chosen your wearers wisely. But no longer shall you obey any hand driven by ambition alone. From this day forth, let your power rise only in service to those who carry compassion with strength, mercy with wisdom. The dress pulsed again as if in agreement. A sound like a soft chime rang through the hall, and every flower in the garlands bloomed at once. Outside, the bells tolled in joy, not alarm. The people began to cheer, not for vengeance but for the kind of justice that rebuilds rather than destroys. In the weeks that followed, tales spread like seed on wind. Of the queen who returned not with fire but with grace. Of the treacherous stepsister who now tended fields alongside farmers she once ignored. Of the sentient dress that fluttered gently in the wind when truth was spoken near it. Of a throne no longer feared but honored. Minstrels sang of the day the dress flew from lies into light. Children whispered legends about how it would someday choose again, centuries from now, should a ruler forget their heart. The story was added to the Book of Queens, bound in silver thread and stored in the Temple of Lore. And in the gardens of the palace, where Amara walked often with the common folk she now welcomed freely, the flowers bloomed a little brighter. Because Elthamra had not simply gained a queen. It had remembered how to hope. And so the years passed as all years do, carried on the breath of wind and the rustle of turning leaves. The kingdom of Elthamra flourished under Queen Amara's reign, not with iron walls or roaring armies, but with open hands and listening hearts. The wells she dug with her own hands never ran dry. The schools she built taught not just history and arithmetic but kindness, duty, and the strength of mercy. But above all, in quiet chambers and golden courtyards, the dress of Eloria remained. Not locked away, not displayed like a trophy but resting, folded in moonlight, waiting. It shimmered still, though no longer restless. It had found what it sought, a spirit that wore the crown before the cloth, a queen not chosen by blood but by choice. And now, in the gentle corners of the world, where fireplaces crackle and stormy nights beg for stories, there lives a tale told in whispers and wonder. There was once a dress, old grandmothers begin, not stitched by tailor's hand but by the wind and starlight. It could not be stolen, nor fooled, nor forced. It saw the soul before the face, the heart before the voice. And when a false queen wore it, it writhed. When the true one returned, it flew to her like a falcon to its sky. Children gather close when this part comes. Some imagine themselves wearing the silver cloth. Others picture it soaring through clouds, chasing truth. And even now, the tale concludes, the dress of Eloria waits. For though Queen Amara's time has passed into story, the dress remembers. It sleeps in silk shadows, dreaming not of beauty or crowns, but of the one who will come when the kingdom needs her most. And in the hush that follows, young eyes widen. For they know now that royalty isn't born. It's chosen by courage, by kindness, and by something older than both. The dress lives on. And the story, like all true folktales, never really ends.